Is it possible to say who calls the shots in Bangladesh? Where does the buck stop? Does it stop with Professor Yunus, or does it actually stop with the army chief, even if he's not upfront and visible?
No, I don't think it stops with the army chief in any sense, but it does stop with Yunus in many sense on the other side. But there is also a factor which is the students, the if you like, the heroes of the demonstration. For example, yesterday a massive transformation occurred in the highest court of Bangladesh, the appellate division, and all the judges of that division were forced to resign. So the students spontaneously went out onto the street in a way and demanded the resignation of the appellate division.
For an Indian audience, the key question is how does the new interim government view Bangladesh's relationship with India? In interviews that he gave before he became chief advisor, Professor Yunus expressed reservations about the relationship between Sheikh Hasina and Prime Minister Modi. Will those reservations, which have appeared in the Indian papers periodically, affect his attitude to India? Or will he consciously be able to put them behind him and say, this is a new opportunity to build a new relationship?
He's a very wise man and enjoys tremendous respect, not only in Bangladesh but globally. I'm sure he will rise above all the all the perceptions and move towards really a good, functional, mutually win-win relationship with India.
Is the call to stop these attacks on minorities being heeded?
Absolutely, and heeded not only by the government, the interim government, it is being heeded by the media, by NGOs, by all voluntary organizations, and even to our great surprise and pleasure, that the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a very religious party, we have seen instances where they went out to protect temples. And symbolically speaking, this is absolutely great. But yes, it occurred. It is now hopefully totally stopped.
You said a moment ago that the attacks on minorities may have totally stopped. You mean that they actually have come to a full stop?
Well, if it's a bit of exaggeration for me, it's totally stopped, but definitely there is really, at least of today's paper, we didn't report any further instance of similar incident.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How independent and how effective is the new interim government in Bangladesh headed by Professor Muhammad Yunus? That's one of the key issues I shall raise today with the publisher and editor of Bangladesh's leading English language newspaper, The Daily Star, Mahfuz Anam. Mahfuz Anam, let's start with Professor Muhammad Yunus and the interim government he heads as chief advisor. Do you have any sense of how it's been received and how it is viewed by the Bangladeshi people?
Yes, I have a very strong sense of it. He, first of all, enjoyed tremendous reputation, prestige, goodwill as it is. Um, and the fact that he was under so much of harassment, literally sentenced to jail, and he was at the end, he was on bail. And we were fearing that once he comes back from Paris Olympics, he might end up in jail. Uh, and also the fact that there is really no comparable personality in Bangladesh whose public image is as strong. And he was brought in at the request of the demonstrators who were in millions. But after it took over as a newsman, we have had a lot of contact, and the public has a huge sense of relief and support, which means that there's huge expectation from his government.
Now, there is a view abroad, and perhaps it's shared in some quarters of Bangladesh as well, that Muhammad Yunus's government is not really independent. It's dependent upon the army, and in particular, it's dependent upon the army chief Waker-uz-Zaman for support. To what extent is that view correct? To what extent is it mistaken?
I mean, such perception can be there because this regime change, army had a role in bringing it about. But it is really the regime change is a reflection of massive public demonstration. So, normally when a regime change occurs, it is led by the army, at least in the case of Bangladesh, it is actually led by the army and the change takes place. Here, in my view, it was led by the people who were led by the students, and the army acquiesced to it. Army, if you like, facilitated the process, because without that sort of a institutional backing, this changeover wouldn't have taken place. But to their credit, I would say the army remains very much in the background. We don't see them meeting with the chief advisor. We don't see them commenting on any policies. They're truly in the background, but definitely army's support is known to be behind the interim government.
Let me put it like this. Is it possible to say who calls the shots in Bangladesh? Where does the buck stop? Does it stop with Professor Yunus, or does it actually stop with the army chief, even if he's not upfront and visible?
No, I don't think it stops with the army chief in any sense, but it does stop with Yunus in many sense on the other side. But there is also a factor which is the students, the if you like, the heroes of the demonstration. For example, yesterday, a massive transformation occurred in the highest court of Bangladesh, the appellate division, and all the judges of the division were forced to resign because a massive public perception took place that the judges who were all appointed during Sheikh Hasina's tenure, mind you, remember she was in power for 15 years. So a lot of institutional leadership are in the hands of people who were people of the regime. So there was a perception, I don't know if it was a fact or not, that there'll be some judicial move to destabilize or delegitimize the interim government. So the students spontaneously went out onto the street in a way and demanded the resignation of the appellate division, which as an institution I feel very uncomfortable about, that judges should not be removed on street demonstration, but it did happen.
But tell me this, the ouster, if I can use that word, of the Chief Justice and 5 other judges has also been accompanied by the resignation of people who are best described as academics or vice chancellors of universities and institutions. This has been in the papers. Have people been hounded out by the students? Is there a purge of some sort happening, even if it's not fully acknowledged?
Yes, I mean, again, I come back to the original statement that this regime has been in power for 15 years. And unfortunately, Sheikh Hasina's mind worked in a way that every institution has to be, has to be held by her lackeys, if you like. So the vice chancellors, it takes a Dhaka University vice chancellor, the most prestigious university. Over the years, the appointments got worse and worse and worse. And I'm not talking about particular this vice chancellor, but the one before him was absolutely a disaster, a shame. So it is a fact that all the university vice chancellors had to be loyalist to her. So there is a backlash, and it's happening.
But would you call it a purge, or would that be a mistaken term?
It is a cleansing process. I wouldn't call it a purge because it is not decided at like the education ministry of the interim government. These are under public pressure and under their own background. So they are feeling that it is better to get out of the way than to be harassed by the students.
But it's happening primarily at the behest of the students. It's not Professor Yunus who's doing it, it's the students who are demanding it.
Absolutely. That has to be very clearly understood. And that's what I was saying, that the buck stops at Yunus's desk in most of the cases, but there is definitely a huge sway of public opinion led by the students who are determining many of the, at least the people who head institution. Take, for example, the Bangladesh Bank, a very sensitive post. And this gentleman was totally an appointee of the prime minister, and he understood the sentiment and he moved away. Also, not only the governor, but 5 deputy governors. So yes, in a sense, you can say, I mean, it sounds or looks like a purge, but it is actually a reflection of public demand.
Now, Professor Yunus has repeatedly said, and this has been echoed by his foreign advisor Tawheed Hussain, that restoring law and order and ending attacks and violence is the first priority. So let me start by asking, as of today, how successful has Professor Yunus been? Has he been able to get the police back on the streets? Are they still hesitant to come out? Are they functioning? Or are students having to fulfill those jobs, those tasks instead?
Well, it's a very dangerous, if you like, situation if public or students end up replacing the police. But they have done it at the level of traffic police. They have been managing Dhaka traffic for the last several days. But the good news is that yesterday the police withdrew all their demands and are joining their jobs from this morning.
Now, your newspaper on Saturday on its front page reported that Mr. Yunus has called repeatedly for attacks on minorities to stop. Is he being heeded? Is that call being listened to? Your paper on Saturday, quoting statistics put out by the Bangladesh Hindu Buddhist Christian Unity Council, said that in the first 5 days since the fall of Sheikh Hasina, there had been 205 attacks on minority institutions, on minority people. That's a very large number in just 5 days. So I ask you, is the call to stop these attacks on minorities being heeded?
Absolutely. And heeded not only by the government, the interim government, it is being heeded by the media, by NGOs, by all voluntary organizations, and even to our great surprise and pleasure, that the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a very religious party, we have seen instances where they went out to protect temples. And symbolically speaking, this is absolutely great. But yes, it occurred. It is now hopefully totally stopped. But there were also, I mean, that report we have published the report, but as you know, that those reports are based on newspaper reports, which mostly are authentic. So it is there. It is very shameful on the part of Bangladesh as a country, we as a people, but happily it is coming to an end.
So you said a moment ago that the attacks on minorities may have totally stopped. You mean that they actually have come to a full stop?
Well, if it's a bit of an exaggeration for me, it's totally stopped, but definitely there is really, at least of today's paper, we didn't report any further instance of similar incident.
That's very reassuring, Mr. Anam. If law and order is the first challenge, the second challenge must be getting the economy working again. Bangladesh is the world's second biggest exporter of ready-made garments, and this is a major source of export as well as investment. Where do things stand on that front? Is that side of the economy functioning, or has it stalled because of the troubles?
It slowed, but it is coming back functioning, and hopefully it will go into their highest efficient level. But let me give an example of what had happened. Yesterday, there was a demonstration in several banks where the employees wanted the change of directors. Now, let me give you an example. Bangladesh's biggest bank was one called Islamic Bank. It was the biggest bank, functioning very well. But suddenly one day, the security forces picked up their directors, forced them to resign, and new directors were forced to be employed. And then one particular business family, which is known to have been very close to the prime minister, was given a huge amount of share of that bank. And then that group ended up borrowing 35,000 crore from that bank. And the bank's efficiency decreased tremendously. Similarly, there were 6 other banks. So together, Islamic Bank and 6 other banks, 7 banks, that one particular group had huge amount of share suddenly. So if you look at it as an economy, one group was owning majority or if close to majority shares in 7 banks. Now, and that group is a notorious group. They have siphoned off money abroad. And we reported in the Daily Star about $1 billion business in Singapore and many other countries. Now, so these employees yesterday came out and there were gunshots firing because of the other group. So yes, there are very disturbing signs. Now, if you have if you have contestation among the bank employees about their own directors, so obviously public confidence will be hurt. So this is an example of how cronyism had penetrated every sector, and I was giving it as an example from the banking sector.
But is this sort of problem, which you illustrated by referring to the banking sector, is this sort of problem of cronyism, of deliberate corruption under the diktat of the previous prime minister, is that being expeditiously tackled?
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
And it's a priority for the interim government, because if one thing Mr. Yunus has, that is talent and understanding as a banker. So I take it this is a priority for him.
Definitely so, but it is an example of the institutional cronyism, the corruption that had taken place, and the challenges that Mr. Yunus has.
Okay. Now, for an Indian audience, the key question is, how does the new interim government view Bangladesh's relationship with India? In interviews that he gave before he became chief advisor, Professor Yunus expressed reservations about the relationship between Sheikh Hasina and Prime Minister Modi. Will those reservations, which have appeared in the Indian papers periodically, affect his attitude to India? Or will he consciously be able to put them behind him and say, this is a new opportunity to build a new relationship?
He's a very wise man and enjoys tremendous respect, not only in Bangladesh, but globally. I'm sure he will rise above all the, all the perceptions and move towards really a good, functional, mutually win-win relationship with India. However, Mr. Thapar, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that how is India today reacting to this changeover? This is going to affect, forget Yunus and the interim government. It is affecting Bangladesh's perception of India. This is very vital. Today we carry in our newspaper that much of the reporting of the violence on minorities in Indian social media and also in Indian some mainstream media was based on fake news. This is BBC fact checking and coming out. Let's say one example. There is a very famous cricketer in Bangladesh whose name is Liton Das. He's a Hindu. And it was reported that his house was vandalized and blah, blah, blah. Actually, the house belonged to another famous cricketer who is an Awami League MP. His house was vandalized for political reasons. It was not Liton Das. This is one example I'm saying. There was another example of a temple being burnt in Chittagong, but actually the photograph is that there was an Awami League office behind the temple which was set on fire, and the photograph shows that the temple with the fire. So please, I would earnestly request all my Indian journalist friend that you also do fact checking. Why should the BBC have to take this burden? You are established media and you have a reputation. Why can't you do your fact checking? Now, this is happening, and this is affecting Bangladesh's perception of India at the people's level. Now, we have.
Can I interrupt? Are you saying that this sort of deliberate, and I'm using that word very carefully, but this sort of deliberate misreporting, fake reporting, could actually affect the way the interim government views India unless India takes steps to stop it?
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of the government, but I'm speaking on behalf of the public, of which, as a media, I'm a part. I mean, please understand that the rightists in Bangladesh would love to exaggerate what happens in India. For example, a Muslim is killed or his mosque is set on fire. I receive many calls from the rightists in Bangladesh. Hey, listen, Daily Star, why aren't you publishing it? Even if you are publishing it, it is not well displayed. So please understand that the rightists in Bangladesh, what they do, feed the rightists in India. And what the rightists in India do, the extremists, the religious extremists, what they do feeds the religious extremists in Bangladesh. It is a problem that has to be dealt with maturity and understanding. But I'm afraid the mainstream media and the social media, which is very popular, are just going berserk on some facts, which is I will not deny, but many of it are fake.
Now, the Indian paper, The Times of India, has reported that though earlier he served as Deputy High Commissioner in Calcutta, Tawheed Hussain, the new foreign advisor, effectively your foreign minister, believes that Bangladesh's relationship with India has not always worked to Bangladesh's interests. The two examples that Mr. Hussain cites, or the Times of India cites on his behalf, are firstly the sharing of the Teesta waters, and secondly, people being shot on the border by India's BSF. What more can you tell me about Mr. Hussain's views about India? It seems that he has certain very specific instances in mind where he believes the relationship needs to be corrected and things that have not worked in Bangladesh's interest put right.
Mr. Thapar, I'm glad the two issues you mentioned, this is not only the perception of our current foreign advisor, this is a widely held perception. Now, look at the background. When Mr. Manmohan Singh was visiting Bangladesh quite a few years ago, a Teesta Water Treaty was ready for signature. He came with that, and it was well known that the treaty was ready. And at the last moment, Mamata Banerjee said she doesn't agree. So here was the Indian Prime Minister in Dhaka about to sign, and then the treaty got derailed, and I think it was great embarrassment for the Indian Prime Minister. And this has happened, I would say, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years ago. And since then, it's been dormant, and we meet and talk and meet and talk. So it's not only his perception, it's a hugely popular public perception that on the Teesta, Indian government is dragging its foot. Now, the narrative from the central government is that Mamata is putting up all the brakes, so our hands are tied. But in Bangladesh, perception is that we are dealing with the Indian government, and the Indian government was ready to sign. Why has it not been signed? This is one. Secondly, border killing, yes. Again, it is not his perception only, it is a perception widely held that why are there so many deaths in the border? And why are many times when there was a discussion between the chief on the Indian side and on the Bangladesh side, the decision was zero killing. And then if there is any shot fired, it will be rubber bullets or something, or stunning bullets. A person will lose his consciousness, but not his life. Of course, the good side is that the killing has greatly, greatly decreased. But it was quite a large in number at one stage.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying two things. Both of these issues, the Teesta waters and the killing on the borders, are key concerns from Bangladesh's point of view, but they're not new concerns. They've been there for a long while. They've been there, as you mentioned, in the case of the Teesta waters for 8 or 10 years. The interim government will be just as aware of them and just as keen to tackle them and find a solution as previous governments were. This is not something new. This is something that does, however, need to be tackled to get the relationship flourishing.
Right. And please just remember that Bangladesh, India, there are thousands of issues on which we may conquer and thousands of issues on which may differ. It's a very comprehensive neighbor relationship. So issues can be raised and discussed, but it should be raised as if it is an issue between two friends, not in a very hostile sense.
Okay.
Now, here, if I may share a perception, this is absolutely my perception. I have been in with the Daily Star now more than 32 years, and so I've been a front rank viewer of political development of the track to relationship with India. And as I am a firm believer in good relationship with India, I have always followed it with interest. Now, I have had many Indian journalist friends, some editors and some senior journalists, and this is my perception. Maybe I'm wrong, but I want to share it. That when an Indian journalist talks to me and defends India's interest, the mindset is that it is patriotism. But when I, as a Bangladeshi journalist, defended Bangladesh's interest to that same person or the group, I got the feeling that the perception was I'm anti-Indian.
Let me assure you that is not the case in this instance. But as far as I'm concerned, you're saying things that are not anti-Indian. You're saying things that reflect to an Indian audience how Bangladeshis feel, and it is in our interest in India, both as a people and as a government, that we should understand, that we should perceive things as you view them, so that we can also respond adequately. Let me leave that there. I fully understand what you're saying. There's no misunderstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that. And there are many other friends of mine who are also on the same page, but that was my feeling. Now, I would like to say that today, with the changeover of the government, with Yunus here and all that, I think it is an opening for a huge reflection on the side of Bangladesh and definitely on the side of India, that why doesn't the relationship really become very, very mutually supportive and cooperative? Am I taking too much of your time?
No, but you're making a good point. I think it's a well-taken point. But let me move on further.
I haven't finished.
I don't want to get stuck on this issue. Let me move on.
But please let me have a chance. Let's say last 16 years, Bangladesh had the best relationship with India under Sheikh Hasina's regime. What has India actually done? Couldn't India have advised her that, look here, you are getting more and more unpopular? I'm sure India knew it. Couldn't India have advised her that, listen, this one-sided election you are holding 3 times is going to undermine you, and that in turn, if you fall, it will affect the relationship? I mean, I don't think India acted as a true friend of Sheikh Hasina, because the feedback could have been very, very vital, because she cut off the feedback position internally. There was no dissent, and media was totally controlled. So she deprived herself from very vital feedback.
Okay, I take that point entirely. Let's use this moment to talk a little about Sheikh Hasina. There is no doubt that she is a reviled figure at the moment in Bangladesh. Politically, she was an autocrat responsible for countless disappearances and arrests, and and I'm using this word deliberately, the suppression of Bangladeshi democracy. But economically, she was responsible for Bangladesh's GDP trebling, from 155 billion in 2010 to 450 billion in 2023. Your country's great success as an exporter of garments happened under her. The fact that you have a higher per capita income than India happened under her. The fact that your human development indices are often better than India happened under her. So today, when she's reviled, and rightly so for her undemocratic behavior, how much credit does she get for what she did to develop Bangladesh?
Yes. Now, it's like, of course, she deserves a lot of credit, and history will give it to her. But that's part of the story. Okay. Now, let's take, for example, one very dramatic example. Corruption was very high during her time, and why she allowed it, I don't, we never understood. Take one example. A nuclear plant we are building in Bangladesh, 2,400 megawatt, and we are paying $13+ billion to Russia. That's how much it's going to cost. A similar nuclear plant has been built in Tamil Nadu. It is 2,000 megawatt, not 2,400, 2,000 megawatt. And it's cost half of what we are paying. How come? Same country, Russia, and it is in India right next door, and it is in Bangladesh. So this dramatizes the inflated cost. Now, we are laying railway lines much higher than per kilometer railway line than it costs in India, much higher than it costs in Bangladesh, almost 8 times higher compared to India and compared to Pakistan. So we have had mega projects, but these mega projects were so highly priced that I don't know how Bangladesh is going to repay them. So yes, she deserves a lot of credit for many things, but there are some fundamental weaknesses for which Bangladesh will have to pay in the coming days.
Now, the Indian press, NDTV in particular, and the Economic Times specifically, yesterday carried what they alleged or claimed was an undelivered speech of Sheikh Hasina's, a speech that she had wanted to deliver before she left, but she was told she didn't have time and couldn't deliver it. This was then allegedly leaked to NDTV and to the Economic Times. And in this speech, she apparently accuses the United States of plotting her downfall. She even alleges that had she been prepared to give the United States control over St. Martin Island, she would have continued in power. Thereafter, her son Sajib has tweeted to say this speech is false, there is no such speech, it is fake. But do you believe that she would and her supporters would seek to blame the United States? Is that sentiment correct, even if the actual speech may not be?
Okay, let me not speculate, but as a journalist, I will go back that when she was in power as the prime minister, she did say similar things, that US was trying to take the St. Martin Islands. So whether this letter is true or not, and by the way, we did not publish it ourselves because we fact check, and we realized that there was serious doubt about his authenticity. So my reply to your question is based on the statement she made when she was the prime minister. And yes, while she was in power, she made such claims.
So it's very interesting. The speech itself, which NDTV and the Economic Times produced, may be fake. Sajid may be right in saying there's no such speech. But the sentiments that were there in that speech were things she said when she was prime minister. Those thoughts about the US plotting against her, about St. Martin Island and how the US wanted it and she was denying it, those thoughts have been expressed by her as prime minister.
Time and again. Okay. Not only once, but time and again. She one day said that a white man came to her and told her that if she did A, B, C, D, that she will be in power for a long time. So yes, these are all facts from the time that she was in power.
Now, at the moment, as you know, Sheikh Hasina is in India. And although no one knows for sure, it's possible she may be here for quite a while. Her daughter, as you know, lives in India. She's the regional director of the World Health Organization. So if Sheikh Hasina seeks asylum in India, how will that be viewed by your interim government, and how will it be viewed by the Bangladeshi people?
Okay. I mean, there are a group of people in Bangladesh who have always termed her to be, serving India's interest. She was always an Indian sort of, sympathizer, putting Bangladesh's interest above that of India. That group obviously will make a lot of, a lot of hay out of that. Then there may be other people who think, why did she go to India? I personally think that going to India was the natural first step. I personally think that staying in India, to me, is nothing out of the blue. However, what does she do while is she in India? Does she just take an asylum or stay there, as a former leader of Bangladesh and getting all the, if you like, prestige? But if she is very actively involved in politics in Bangladesh, by whatever modern communication means, then I think it will be a concern to the interim government. Every government, not only interim, any government would say that this former leader is in my neighboring country and she's actively involved in Bangladesh's politics. I think that question is a legitimate one. And it will also be a question for the Indian government, that then if Hasina is actively participating in politics, and if Indian government allows it, and obviously the question will be laid that India is supporting her return, and so it's actually a partisan support. India was already supporting Awami League, now India is supporting Awami League again. So it's a tricky situation both for India, but definitely one for Bangladesh, which Bangladesh interim government will watch with seriousness, that yes, on humanitarian grounds, she lives in India. But on political issues, I think there will be a lot of questions.
You're making a very interesting and important distinction between her seeking asylum and what she does from India vis-a-vis Bangladesh if that asylum is granted. It's what she does that would be a matter of great concern. Let me then ask you a further question. Former ministers of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, all of whom are strongly opposed to Sheikh Hasina, have been speaking to Indian papers and have called for Sheikh Hasina to be brought to justice. If she chooses to stay in India, and either the interim government in Bangladesh or a future government seeks her in extradition, almost certainly the Indian government would refuse.
Right.
How much of problem would that situation create?
Okay, as in India, so is in Bangladesh, politicians are always trying to exploit a situation for their benefit. So BNP, to make this issue that India should send her back for sending trial, these are all political issues, and it will have some sort of a public support, because right now the memories of her last few days are so vivid, and the deaths on the street is a very emotive issue in Bangladesh. So the demand for a trial will come about. BNP's demand doesn't surprise me, but I definitely it's a very tricky issue for India and for Bangladesh. The demand for justice, bringing her to court, accusing her of really this massacre on the streets, are in a sense real. It happened under her, as you gave her credit that Bangladesh economy grew during her time. So if she is deserving the credit, she must also take the blame. It was under her regime that more than 200 people were shot on the streets of Dhaka within a matter of a week.
Can I interrupt and ask you this? Do you personally believe she should be brought back home and brought to justice? Or do you think, for wiser political reasons, let it be a chapter that's closed and let her live the rest of her life outside Bangladesh?
Okay, let me answer this question in a different way. Bangladesh is suffering greatly from, if you like, a tribalism in politics. So all these years, when BNP was in power, Awami League was the devil in disguise. When Awami League was in power, BNP was the worst thing in the world. So suppressing each other is what the narrative has been. And I personally feel, as a nationalist, as a freedom fighter, that the important thing is to unite at the moment. We should get out of this bipolar political mindset. BNP, Awami League, it has harmed us tremendously. And under Professor Yunus and led by the student, there is a huge chance of getting out of that box and going into a more, if you like, inclusive politics where everybody participates.
In other words, you're also saying, shut the door on Sheikh Hasina, let her live her life abroad, but cut her contact with Bangladesh.
Well, I'm not saying that, but that is also something that Sheikh Hasina and Awami League should consider. That, she had a fantastic innings in many successful ways, but she had also had very, very, if you like, unthinking and destructive sort of things she did. And as I said, towards the corruption and other things. However, in our country, I don't know much of it in India, our country, the culture of self-reflection, culture of admitting our own fault is almost absent. I've never seen BNP ever say that, listen, we made A, B, C, D mistake. Hasina has been furthest from ever admitting. So I think time for her and for Awami League is to reflect that what did we do wrong? How can a party that was the leading party in our liberation war, how can a party that has the legacy of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, how can the party that has been a part of every democratic movement in the days of Pakistan there? So how can a party with that tradition become so disconnected with the people that there are millions of people in the street who want her to return and be tried? I mean, this is something they have to reflect on. And if Awami League has a chance of revival, this reflection is vital.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
We're coming right to the end of this interview, Mr. Anam. Let me ask you 3 quick questions, and I'm going back to the Muhammad Yunus-led government. It is described as an interim government, but do you have any sense of how long it will stay in office? Is it likely to be months? Is it likely to be years? How interim is interim?
Okay, now let me answer this question by the challenges that this government faces. So the students and the public, they want reform. I mean, truly, Mr. Thapar, we have been stuck on this bipartisan political mindset. Awami League on one side, BNP on the other side. On their term, they might have done some good thing, but nationally, as a people, we are divided.
So how long will this government last?
I'm answering you in this sense that, so the demand is reform of politics, reform of political culture. But political party like BNP at the moment is going to demand as early election as possible, because they smell power. They feel that they are at the doorstep of power. So this will be a very intense pressure on the government by, let's say, the BNP and maybe some other parties that hold election now. And there will be a counter pressure on this government to say, look here, take a little time and do some reforms. already two advisors publicly have said that we will take as long as it takes. So we are in a vague situation there. I cannot answer you specifically that what is going to happen and how long the interim government will stay in power.
One last question about the student movement that spearheaded what is now being called the Monsoon Revolution. Two of the top students are already part of the interim government. Do you see a wider, a fuller, a more meaningful political role for the student organizations in the months and years ahead? Might they form their own party and contest the elections and seek to come to power themselves?
Okay, this is a very enticing, if you like, prospect. Bangladesh has been stuck with, their parties, Awami League, BNP, Jamaat, Jatiyo Party. We have never had a chance for a new political party. So what you suggest could be a real possibility. Already, another part of your question was, are they going to be more involved in the government? Already, the interim government has decided that every ministry will have a student, if you like, an advisor. So they are going to sit, I don't know exactly the procedure, but they will have an input in, let's say, education, in particularly education, women's rights or human rights, and administration, all these things. So that is already decided that students will be a part of every ministry.
And this includes ministries like Defense and Foreign Affairs and Home?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But home, yes. Home, yes. Now, look here. This is another lesson to learn. Using the police almost like an extension of your party. You see, there has been quite a few police killed by mob, not by the student, but there have been deaths in the police. Why have the police been the recipient of such hatred? Because time and again, we saw that police, were used by the ruling party. In fact,
but come back to the students. You
yes,
believe that they will be playing a more prominent, a clearer, more obvious political role in the months and years ahead.
right. And I would prefer that instead of being out in the wilderness and being here and there, they should form a political party, and they should register and participate in the coming election. I see, believe me, Mr. Thapar, I see this as a flush of new energy, new idea, because Bangladesh's politics had really gotten into that bipartisan box, and we want
In
to
other words, this is a moment when you could see the beginning of a generation change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I feel as an editor that in my own paper, my mindset has to change, because my reporters are stuck in their old frame of beat, transportation, finance, blah, blah, blah. Now the new beat is students, I mean, young youth, and they're articulating their views, and some of them are so eloquent. This is the type of state I want. This is the type of politics I want. This is the type of police I want. And the ideas are so supremely attractive.
Mr. Anam, thank you very much for opening our eyes to the situation in your country and for the time you have spared for me. Take care. Stay safe.
My last appeal through you to my Indian friends and journalists, please take a fresh look into Bangladesh.
Okay.
We are an independent country of 170 million. We have made many flaws. We have a lot of problems, but we also have ideas. We also want to move on, and we want to move on with a very win-win relationship with India.
Mr. Anam, that will be clearly heard by the Indian audience when this interview goes up. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.